Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, folks. Buckle up. We're going to look at this AI in regards to privacy with FERPA. It's off to you,
Thank,
gentlemen.
thank you, Brendan. Good to see you, Dale. In true fashion of your cooking style, fundamental chicken, this conversation is about a fundamental aspect of what rules governs and, in a way, is the upkeep of regulation policy in higher education, FERPA. It's not a conversation about bells and whistles per se. It's a conversation about the emergent practice of privacy, and you're the authority. You're writing the book. Literally, you're writing the book and a chapter on what FERPA and AI look like. And what I wanted to do in the next half hour is take our friends and followers and audience here through three stages, right? In this case, recap, where is this emerging? Um, Number two, some use cases, and then kind of bring it all together. So in our conversation, and this is where I want to turn to you, you were so impactful in something in my brain that it was JC is not that simple. FERPA is nuance. Everything that we do in FERPA is nuance. And when you bring the AI layer, it's nuance. And there's certain things where AI and FERPA, very clear that checks, doesn't check, that track this violation or not. There's some other places that is more nuanced. So can we just basically unpack this where FERPA is at and where AI is fitting today?
Sure, JC. And first of all, I don't think I've heard FERPA called fun, but I'll take that anyway. So yeah, the interesting thing about FERPA, and I know we have an international audience, maybe some people here just to understand that when we say FERPA, we're talking about the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and which was passed back in 1974, and which of course I don't think AI was on anybody's radar at that point in time. And basically, the thing about FERPA is people think of it, it's not really a law that protects the privacy of students. It's really narrowed to the protects the privacy of students' education record.
Right.
So when we talk about FERPA, it's not a confidentiality law per se. It's really a privacy of records law. And what it does is it protects those institutions have to protect students' education records from any inappropriate disclosure. And then they have to also give students access to those records and allow them certain other rights regarding those records. So it's really about education records. And then when you're talking about what is an education record, that's defined in the law as any information, any record that contains information that's directly related to a student and is also maintained by the institution or any party that's acting on behalf of the institution. So it's a two-pronged test. First of all, when we start talking about AI, we have to figure out, well, what is an education record in
Right.
terms of AI? And also, when we're talking about disclosing any kind of information that would be in an education record, it's understanding that under the law that a student would have to give written consent before there's any disclosure, and specifically as any disclosure of PII.
Mhm.
And this is where it gets into a little bit tricky when we're talking about PII. I mean, the statute defines PI as, you have direct identifiers and indirect identifiers, but it also talks about PII being any information that alone or in combination with other information could re-identify or identify an individual student with reasonably identify, whereas an individual in a school community would be able to identify the individual. So, and as we sort of talk about then in terms of how does AI come into play? Well, AI is sort of where we have to really determine whether AI generated information qualifies as an education record. It's really, you have to really look at it very carefully. One, if institutions are sharing information with an AI platform, that's clearly a disclosure that may be made of AI, PI to the AI system. But where it gets tricky is that AI then further uses that information and it may create create new documents, or it's going to process information and create new information, or it's going to be analyzing data and doing and making further determinations based on that information. So it's not that it's not. This is where it really gets complex.
Correct.
And I think when we think about AI and we think about FERPA, you have to sort of remember they're really, they're going to always be in a battle because AI is all about AI grows by getting access to more information. It feeds off of information. The
Of
more
course.
information it gets, the better it learns, the better it produces, and the more accurate it is. Where FERPA is totally the opposite. FERPA is about protecting and limiting information, any disclosure of PII. So there's always just going to be this battle, and then if we're trying to figure out how FERPA would apply to AI generated information, it really gets more complex because there's always going to be this struggle. And given that when you're talking about AI creating information, it's created instantaneously. It's not like it's it could happen immediately, and they've created a new document. And then you get into the issue with AI when you're talking about if it's information if they're creating a record, an education record, then how are you going to give students access? What does that mean to give them access to these? If institutions know what's being created, even so, how do students have access? How are they going to be able to seek to amend those records? So it gets very complex when you're trying to apply FERPA, which was created in 1974 to deal with basically. At that point, you barely had
Not AI.
kind of data system at all. It was
Correct.
all paper record. So it's again, we're trying to figure out how would you apply it, and I don't know if we have all the answers. I know that from the federal government, they have not really addressed this yet. So it really becomes a very complex issue, and we're going to talk today, but we're probably going to present more questions that we will have answers to.
So, to recap, two bodies of thought. One that is basically created for the needs with the systems in the 70s to address privacy, and one that comes to us in the last 4 or 5 years that allows hyper personalization, a new experience, all the wonderful things that we're seeing in AI. And these two, as you said, are in constant odds, a constant battle. Point number one that we should be taking away from your disclosure, as you, the expert, is that this is emergent, and whatever answers you have today for us are getting there. But there's a really important nuance, what you call the two prompt, right? Is it part of PII data, basically of the student record, correct? And that it's, I think it's fair to say, not all AI uses personal information data, right? There's incredible numbers of AI and examples that thrive from information from the student that is not PII. It could be behavioral, right? It could be multiple things or not, right? So a ton of AI comes to us and is being trained without having access to that data. So that's basically what we should be living with. What I love to do is now turn, and we have some questions coming in. I'm going to try to squeeze them in here. I'd like to have the conversation in 3 parts of how do you start thinking about this, Dale? If I could group AI into 3 different components, the state of AI today, there's a ton of AI that helps us, and we've touched it, we're part of it, and it looks like a chat GPT prompt. Probably everyone is here has done a chat GPT prompt or a Gemini prompt or some type of, Claude prompt. We know that, and I'd like for you to take, the FERPA, not FERPA, and how does it feel like? Number 2, there is AI that is in-app. We're already getting questions on chatbots. What happens when the student authenticates? Is that free game and things of that sort? And that's really, really interesting because what you start seeing is AI becoming an assistant and co-pilot to the things that we do. But there's this third wave of AI, which we heard it in keynote, and it's this aspect of agentic AI in which the workflows are autonomous and there's some type of independence on AI, And one of the points that you brought in is that maybe new data is being created, and these aspects of new data that AI creates. Is that PII and not, and how does FERPA come in? So with that, let's start with the first example. And the way I like to do this one is, this is in the general AI assistant. So as I said before, this part probably what all of us have navigated with. And it looks like I am an administrator, and I'm going to go into my preferred solution. Let's call it right now ChatGPT. And I'm going to say, hey, can you draft a letter to a student about financial aid suspension? So in this case, I need to notify Mary that she's going to be suspended. Her financial aid is going to be suspended because of something that happened with maybe her academic performance. Where do you see this in the aspect of FERPA, not FERPA, being violated in the constant battle of AI in FERPA?
Well, okay. So we're talking about here, if we're talking about more about ChatGPT, which is more of an open or public access.
Hmm.
I think anytime we're talking about staff or institutions utilizing these public AI platforms, then I think it's a greater risk there of disclosure and a greater risk of possibly a violation. And again, it all goes back, when we're talking about, well, in an example you gave, well, you could argue, well, was there any PI in this situation provided to into ChatGPT in order to create this letter? And if there's no PI, and this is where it really gets tricky with AI though. So
Great.
maybe they're not disclosing any either direct or indirect identifiers, but the teacher in that example or the professor in that example or staff is giving certain amount of information that would allow the AI then to take that information and then like Brendan did on me, went out to GPT and they found all this additional information and then was able to pull that. There was sufficient amount of anonymized information that was provided in the ChatGPT. And then they used all sources to take that a limited amount of information and they were able then to re-identify who that student was. So when you're using, I think that there is a real danger, I think, at least for institutions and for staff to be utilizing public AI platforms as opposed to those that are institutionally controlled or managed. And again, if it's a student using it, students can disclose anything. I mean,
Sure.
if
It's
students
self-disclosure, right? Yeah.
using it, they want to give their information away. That's not a FERPA issue at all. It's only when this institution itself is going to be disclosing any kind of information, because we talk about what are AI? Is AI I think you may want to ask, is it a school official? Is it a
Yeah.
tool? What is it? Well, behind every AI is a vendor. We know that. So any disclosure that's being made to an AI platform is being disclosed to a vendor, basically. Um, so I think,
So what I'm hearing is you have this prompt-based summarization, something like that. And if the data that I'm using to create the prompt doesn't have any PI, it's fair game. It could be a notification, right? It
right.
could be, hey, I'm just basically sending a note, an email, right? So it's fine. But the moment maybe GPA is being mentioned, maybe the financial aid suspension is because you haven't attended 17 lessons, right? That could be an issue. There's a question here that I think will get us into FERPA violation. I'd like to understand your take on it based on what you just mentioned. What if in this prompt, I actually dropped a list of students, so in this case, a roster, and I want to conduct some analysis. So give me the average GPA. Look at this, Excel sheet that has all my students and tell me the average financial aid. And I'm using this, general assistant AI to generate that analysis. Where do you find that to be within the FERPA in AI convergence? Oops, I moved the slides.
No, I think what you're talking about would be a disclosure of PII. I mean, if it's going to be that kind of information, it's going to be disclosed to, in I think an example we're talking about, if it's ChatGPT, that would be a disclosure if the institution or somebody representing the institution is providing that information. And then any information, and then any analysis that would be done by ChatGPT in that situation potentially would be an education record. So there is a most likely, unless there's because remember under FERPA, you couldn't the institution staff could not disclose any PII to ChatGPT without consent of the student in this case, or unless it would meet one of the exceptions to consent, which there are a few, which I think we'll probably end up talking about in a few moments, where institutions are safe in being able to utilize AI systems in a way that would be compliant with FERPA. But there is definitely, in the way you're talking here, it would be potentially a violation.
So, and that one probably we're there. Now let's go to this other use case. And this is basically where AI lives in app. We call them copilots. And this is basically your classical chat bot that lives in your website. It's some basically technology that has been sourced. There's a vendor-client relationship, obviously, right? And this is also based on the questions that I'm seeing on the chat room. This is where your application management system will be asking for phone numbers and things of that sort. And they're all AI powered. So if your institution has an in-app solution vendor, you control the AI. And the use case I have here is now I'm a professor, right? And I use my Copilot. Think about something in Microsoft, right? Or inside an LMS, and I want to summarize a discussion that has posed, and I want to create flags for all the students who are falling behind. So in-app and it's definitely touching data to be effective that it's PII. What do you think of this?
Well, I think that, I don't think under FERPA, this is something I think that institutions could do. And especially when it's an institution-controlled AI system, as opposed to what we were talking about earlier, with which would be public. If in these kind of situations, you could have AI do those in similar type of analysis. But what you would need to do under FERPA is they would need to be designated as a outsourced school official, basically, is under FERPA. That is one of the, and once they do that, then under FERPA, they would be permitted, the institution would be permitted to share whatever information to that third party, who, in this case, the AI vendor, who is going to be performing a function or for the institution. So FERPA does permit that, and it has certain guidelines of how being able to do this. And that's really the safest way and the only way, actually, that I think that institutions are able to disclose information to AI, and not only disclose, but permitting AI to further use that information to create new analysis or create new PI or to process information. That would all be permitted under this exception to consent. The key to it, though, is one of the requirements is that the institution would need to maintain direct control over how, in this what we're talking about AI, and how
Keyword control, yeah.
Using that information. And that is where it gets tricky and very complex for institutions in determining how are you going to maintain direct control over how AI is using that information, or whether they're further disclosing that information. Because basically AI can be, if they're thinking and making their own decisions, they may decide on their own to disclose information. So that is where it can be done, but this is where I think institutions need to be very proactive, and you've really got to establish very complex, comprehensive written agreements with these third-party AI providers in order to be able to better ensure. I don't know if you could actually guarantee, but you got to be to better ensure that FERPA compliance, and there are protections in place to safeguard the data that they have that was disclosed to them, and the information that that AI has created.
One of the questions that we're getting here, as you elaborate, controlled AI, the terminology that is used from technologies, it's a closed environment. How close are these? And from a FERPA point of view, do we need to worry about this? Because when you think about closed environments, is it about cybersecurity and security? That's not the problem here. The way I interpret this is if it's controlled by the institution as it relates to AI, it's a closed environment, so we are okay. Do you see it the same way, Dale?
Yeah, I mean, there's still, there's still going to be, it's going to still be complex and difficult, but it can be done. I mean, I think that's
Hmm.
under the exception. It's going to have to be done under the school official exception. And I think if institutions are having their own institution controlled AI system, that the way you're going to be able to have better control over this is if you think about it from the very beginning of development of these systems, and that you do basically a privacy by design, use privacy by design principles, and you want to build them in from the beginning. You want to try to build these protections into the system from its the first moment it's entered into the system until it's going to be destroyed. So you need to create these kind of protections and access controls into the system, and controlling how AI is going to be utilizing that information. All of that needs to be done through the privacy, using privacy by design principles and through those written agreements. But I think that this is the beauty of AI is going to be so useful. I mean, institutions are utilizing it now. So it's going to be a tool, and it's just going to be more complex in determining, what information, and trying to identify what are education records. And
Yeah.
again, I think the whole problem is you have to remember that students are going to have a right to access those records. And you're
Yeah.
going to have to
Um,
build that into your models on how are you going to give them access, and how are they going to have a right to seek to amend any of the records. So that's
Speaking of students accessing this, just last question here before we go to agentic. Um, as a student, when I sign in and I get verified as a user, um, that's fair game, right? So if I've consented through the system. So when AI layers come through chatbots or any type of personalization, that's basically an evidence of consent, and all the things that we're talking about should be within the FERPA positive side of that equation. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if student consent now, just if you're talking about where the student can consent by the active use
No,
of it.
what I'm actually being very specific on, I log in into the system, right? So I log in, I provide my email, my password, whatever credentials I have. So isn't that explicit consent when it comes to a technology point of view?
No, I mean, not under for disclosure. I mean, you're talking about two different things. If you're talking about, are you talking
Sure.
about being able to get into the system, or are you talking about consenting for disclosure of information, or permitting AI to further disclose information?
I am talking about when an app and a student logs in and makes basically a this is me. Um, then AI would touch personal data to do what it's supposed to do, right? Maybe give you the status. Do I need to matriculate? Am I still eligible for those type of things? Um, that's basically the use case I wanted to drive. Do you see that as an issue?
No, I don't think so. I
Okay.
think because under FERPA, the consent requirement only
Yeah.
comes into play when the institution is going to be disclosing any PII
Hmm.
to a third party, and they would need to get written consent. And then they would have to, and the FERPA specifies what that consent would need to be. You need to identify the information
Right.
you disclose to the party it's being disclosed to. So that's a two different thing. So in what you're mentioning, I don't think that's a FERPA issue, but it is a good policy to have to ensure that. I mean, I think that would be a good policy to require that students do provide some kind of consent for the use of and into.
Awesome. We have about 3 minutes to do one of the most interesting and nuanced one, but this whole new generation of AI called agentic AI is autonomous. And what happens here, you see in my example, a system can not only think about personalization, so this is something that Element does for everyone who uses Element, but can trigger enrollment workflows and work across multiple systems, as your CRM, SIS, and LMS. Where do you see FERPA thrive in that constant battle with this type of AI. And we have about 2 minutes here, Dale. So
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, FERPA, if you have to go back to the basics of FERPA, FERPA is going to protect personally identifiable information that's contained in a student's education record. So in these kind of situations where they're using, where they're gathering information from multiple data sources in order to create something, again, FERPA comes into play in terms of the actual record that's being created, maintained by if you're talking about the background, but it would be that's really what it's talking about. And this is where I think in these kind of systems where they're using, you've got to be able to map where all the different data flows and processing outputs. You've got to identify which AI generated content would qualify as an education record. I don't think this is easy. This is going to be very complex and on how to do it. And particularly how FERPA will apply, I think is open. We have no guidance from the department at this point in time, so I don't know. This is just going to be a very complex issue.
I hear you, Adele, and we appreciate your time and your expertise here. The last point, as you mentioned, there is a new chapter in the FERPA process being written. It probably as it relates to the use case of agentic AI is even more nuanced. For those of you who want to hear more about continuation of this conversation on how we can use technology, SOC, to policies, security to cut in all the parts of FERPA. I think believe tomorrow Lightning session with Element experts on taking this to the next level. So thank you, Dale, so much. I hope your contact informations are here, or we'll share them so people can maybe send you 55 questions on how they're thinking about this. Thank you, Dale.